Who was Euphemia Elphinstone? The Shetland Islands have always been a key part of Scottish history and politics throughout the centuries. One of the most commonly named residents is very little known to outsiders. There are several iterations of her first name, such as, but I will be going with the most common version, and if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm very sorry, please feel free to correct me in the comments. Either way, Miss Elphinstone tends to appear most prominently not in history books, but in online family trees, earning her the nickname, the Mother of the Shetland Islands. But who was she, and why does she appear to have such an impressive lineage? Euphemia was born on the 11th of May, 1509, to Alexander Elphinstone, who was later promoted to Lord Elphinstone in 1510, and Elizabeth Barlow or Barclay, whom was attached to the house of Margaret Tudor of England. Her maternal grandfather was granted the castle of Kildrummy 2 years before her birth, meaning this was likely the place she would have spent most time while growing up. This is especially the case when you consider the Battle of Flodden Field on the 9th of September 1513. Her father died alongside King James IV of Scotland in the battle against the English as part of a feud lasting for over 2 centuries. This battle has variously been referred to as the Battle of Flodden, the Battle of Flodden Field, the Battle of Brexon Moor. Either way, at just 4 years old, she was left without a father. Euphemia had at least an older sister, either named Isabel or Elizabeth, and a younger brother, Alexander, though their exact dates of birth are disputed. It is possible she had up to 4 other full siblings, not including the 2 to 3 half-siblings she had from her mother's second marriage to John Forbes, but records are debated. All we know for certain is that she was her parents' second-born daughter and that her brother was Alexander Elphinstone, second Lord of Elphinstone. In 1547, her brother Alexander died from wounds he received at the Battle of Pinkie. Little is known of her childhood. She was likely raised and expected to be used as a pawn to be married off in order to better the position of her family, while being subservient to the men around her, as most women were of her day. Sometime between 1530 and 1533, Euphemia found herself in the court of King James V of Scotland as one of his mistresses. She was 3 years older than the young king, whom had been crowned only a year after his birth, and potentially encouraged by the councils of the time to engage in many amorous affairs from Scottish nobility in order to keep him distracted from politics. Being a minor Scottish noble lady, being in the court of the king would have likely been a big deal, with an increased status for her remaining family members and whomever got her into this position, unless she caught his eye of her own accord. Either way, we can only speculate based on other women in similar positions across the 16th century. Favourite mistresses often held great power in court, having the king's ear, allowing them to promote the interests of their own families and male guardians. For Euphemia, this would have likely been her brother or grandfather, or some other family member or patron. In 1533, potentially in the spring, Euphemia gave birth to the king's illegitimate son, Robert Stewart, potentially the 7th of 9 illegitimate children. The claim that Euphemia was simply just a passing fancy to the king is often disputed, due to several sources claiming that Euphemia had a second child by James, who died in infancy, implying that their relationship continued for some time. As for how many children James had, a dispensation sent to James V from the Pope Clement VII, dated August 30th, 1534, allowed for 4 of his illegitimate children to take holy orders when they came to age. This allows us to confirm the approximate years of birth for 4 of his illegitimate sons. The document stated James the elder was in his 5th year, James the younger and John in their 3rd year, and Robert, son of Euphemia, in his 1st year. There appears to be confusion between sources over the number 9 when concerning James V's children. Some claim that he had 9 confirmed illegitimate children, but only 8 of these can be positively identified, though perhaps the 9th is the second child by Euphemia. Other sources claim that there are 9 known mothers to King James V's illegitimate children. However, this cannot be the case. Whilst it is likely that the King of Scotland had many mistresses and lovers whom did not give birth to his issue, there are only 8 known women to have given birth to his children. One of these was his second wife, Mary of Guise, but these children are legitimate, leaving only 7 confirmed mothers of the king's bastards. Despite having discussed that James had 9 illegitimate children, Euphemia's relationship with the king was not completely remarkable. As some sources claim, she was not the only mistress to have a second child by him. Margaret Erskine, also had this honour. Her children were James the Stewart I, Earl of Moray, being around 2 years older than Robert, and Robert Stewart Jr., being born after Euphemia's son. In addition to this, Margaret Erskine had been accredited as being James V's favourite mistress. Despite having so many children, James V had trouble conceiving a legitimate heir. He had no children with his first wife, Madeleine of France. With his second wife, Mary, or Marie, of Guise, they had 2 sons, James, Duke of Rothesay, born the 22nd of May 1540, and Arthur, potentially named Robert, Duke of Albany, born the 12th of April 1541. Just when things began to look up for the royal couple, disaster hit and both boys died in 1541, supposedly just within days with one another. During the ongoing battle with England, James V was told that his wife had given birth to a daughter, instead of the son he had wanted. He was reported as saying, "It came wi' ye lass, and it will gan wi' ye lass," referring to the beginning of the dynasty with Marjorie Bruce, and how it would end with his daughter. 6 days after her birth, James V died, leaving Mary Queen of Scots as the monarch. By 1535, her relationship with James V was presumably over, as she married John Bruce of Cultermine, a minor member of the Bruce family, a descendant of the first King of Scotland, Robert I, also known as Robert the Bruce. However, other sources state that she did not marry him until the 13th of April 1540. Most sources, historical and contemporary, agree that Euphemia and John had 5 children together within their marriage, though most of the years of birth are unknown. Their children were likely named Henry, Robert, James, Eupheme, and Lawrence. Out of her children born by John Bruce, Lawrence was the most important, expected to have been born in 1547. He was appointed as Sheriff of Shetland by his half-brother Robert, who himself had been granted land in Shetland and Orkney by his half-sister Mary Queen of Scots. Despite having been claimed as a tyrant, Robert was said to have died peacefully in his bed on the 4th of February 1593, being succeeded by his even more tyrannical son, Patrick Stewart, 2nd Earl of Orkney. Lawrence built Meun's Castle on the island of Ernst in order to defend himself, after relationships between him and his nephew Patrick became sour. The castle was attacked by Patrick in 1608, but this attack was soon withdrawn. Robert's son had annoyed so many people that, in 1615, he was beheaded on charge of treason. Lawrence outlived him by 2 years, and, like his half-brother before him, he died in his bed at Meun's Castle. As for Euphemia herself, there is no record of her death. Some sources suggest that she died in 1542, whereas most historians agree that her son, Lawrence, was not born until 1547. This would mean that Euphemia must have lived at least until then. But if she did die in the same year as his birth, it could indicate that she died from birthing complications, as did around 1/3 of European women during this time, during their childbearing years. Euphemia Elphinstone was considered the mother of the Shetland Islands, and according to legend, many people hailing from the Shetland Islands are her descendants, particularly those with the surname Bruce, appearing to be able to claim lineage from her children by John Bruce. Thanks for watching. Sorry it was really rough. My microphone is broken, so the audio will be very rough. I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Bye!